We're sitting down with Thomas Pickering, who served as ambassador to many countries, including Russia, Israel, India. He also served as the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations from 1989 to 1992. Ambassador Pickering, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
You co-wrote an article titled Envisioning a Deal with Iran, where you're writing that in order to avoid a confrontation with Iran, the Obama administration should open diplomatic channels with Tehran, learn what Iran needs, and try to make some kind of a deal. What kind of a deal do you envision?
We envisage a deal that might have, in fact, two parts. To start with, to begin with the idea that the Iranians advanced 2 months ago, that they would stop enriching uranium to 20% if we on our side, maybe the P5+1, Russia, China, the United States, Britain and France and Germany, would provide the fuel elements, those pieces of the reactor that they use to make medical isotopes for their population. They now have run out of that fuel. The proposals that we make would be to say, let's give Iran what it says it wants, which is a civil nuclear program, but let's do our best to create the maximum amount of effective inspection. So that's a firewall, a roadblock, a break between their civil program and a military nuclear program.
How realistic is achieving such a deal today? I mean, how big is the resistance among U.S. policymakers?
If you had talked to me a year ago, I would have said pretty high. But since then, several things have happened. Just 2 or 3 months ago, Secretary Clinton made a speech in which there was certainly a clear hint that the old U.S. policy of no enrichment in Iran might well be modified if a deal could be struck so that the U.S. would become satisfied that Iran was proceeding in an open way and in a transparent way, and that would give some confidence that the U.S. side might then agree to a continuing civil program. One of the problems about a civil program is that Iran only has one reactor, and that, I think, thankfully, because it was provided by Russia, is bound up in an agreement where they don't need to get fuel. Russia provides the fuel, and more importantly, Russia takes back the used fuel, which after it's used makes plutonium, and plutonium is directly usable in nuclear weapons. So that's very well safeguarded.
Why did Russia then come under so much attack for assisting their civil nuclear program?
Because at the time, it became increasingly clear that their civil program was at least in part being used as a springboard for investigating items and things which go beyond the civil program and in the direction only of a military weapon.
There is one interesting thing about U.S. official rhetoric towards Iran. On the one hand, you have the Pentagon and U.S. intelligence community is saying that they don't believe Iran has even decided to build a nuclear weapon. And on the other hand, you have the administration pursuing policies which, as if they come from a standpoint that Iran has decided to build a nuclear weapon and everybody's sure about it and they want to stop it. Do you think that that kind of approach might actually push Iran closer to the idea of getting a bomb, even if it hasn't decided?
No, I think that very little that we could do short of an Israeli or U.S. military attack on Iran would push Iran any closer to a decision to make a nuclear weapon. And I agree with your statement. However, you ought to know that Iran is also bound by the Non-Proliferation Treaty. And the Non-Proliferation Treaty says you have a civil program which meets civil needs only and doesn't do things that could be used only for military purposes.
You have the U.S. military saying an Israeli attack on Iran would be a bad idea, and the word was premature.
Not just the U.S. military, I think all elements of the United States believe an attack on Iran not only would be premature, but crazy.
Top U.S. intelligence officials are saying Iran is unlikely to initiate or intentionally provoke a conflict. You served as a U.S. ambassador to Israel at one time, and obviously the U.S. and Israel, they're very close allies. Does Israel really listen to Washington?
I think it does. But sometimes when it feels itself in extreme danger, it takes its own advice. The really interesting thing about the Israeli situation is, as far as I can see, and people have been very clear in saying this, that the heads of the three Israeli intelligence service don't seem to be recommending a military attack. They seem to be against it for good reasons. It involves many too many risks and complications, and it is unlikely to achieve in any serious and continuing way the objective of stopping the Iranian program. And in fact, I believe if you were to attack Iran militarily under the current situation, one result would be they would have a perfectly legitimate reason for saying, we had no interest in a bomb, but now that we've been attacked, we obviously have to make a bomb. So it is counterproductive.
In the article, what I found very interesting, you argue that the hostility of the Iranian rulers towards the U.S. is rooted in their conviction that Washington wants to overthrow them one way or another. Could you expand on that?
I believe that to be true. I haven't talked to Iranian leaders, but I've talked to people who talk to Iranian leaders who at least represent neutral views on the question. And Iran has sat down and cataloged all the things that it sees negative about the United States: overthrow of Mossadegh, support of the Shah, support of Iraq during the 8-year war, the shoot down of the airplane by the cruiser Vincennes, sanctions, and all of these things hemming Iran around. What did they conclude? Well, they must want to change our government.
But they do have reasons to believe
of course they do. Just as we have reasons to believe that they have hegemonic ambitions, that they have no interest in working with the United States, that they want to develop a nuclear weapon. So these are the difficult problems.
To protect them from being overthrown.
Of course. And these are the difficult problems one has to move. I'd have to tell you, outside countries don't do very well overthrowing governments, as both the Soviet Union and the United States have found out. We don't necessarily get to choose who will be the permanent successors. It's not a good idea. I've been around diplomacy for a long time.
Let's talk about the U.S. push for regime change in Syria. Very important thing that they bring up is that the fate of the Syrian leadership should not be decided from the outside. It should be decided by the Syrian people.
Well, of course, and they said negotiation. They said they'd like to see President Assad step aside and his vice president, or whoever it is, take over. But this is preparation, obviously, for a negotiated solution. There has to be a negotiated solution.
Well, but that political solution involves the opposition talking to the government, right? But why does the opposition refuse to talk to the government?
It hasn't refused to talk to the government.
It has.
No, it hasn't. It's refused to talk to President Assad.
Yes, to the government, exactly. There was also a fear that kind of one-sided resolution could invite an intervention, a military intervention, which many analysts said would be disastrous for Syria.
I understand Russia's concern. If they actually believed that the original resolution in Libya was not going to invite some kind of intervention.
The resolution was to protect civilians from immediate danger.
Exactly.
But not to kill Gaddafi. But that's what it turned into.
No, but I told you, that's what my view was of what the resolution, in effect, if you looked at political rallies, political realities, would require.
But anyways, this is not what the resolution said. It was lawyered that way, like later on. Of course, to protect civilians, we needed to kill Gaddafi.
It wasn't lawyered that way. It militarily developed that way. Russia, for reasons I don't understand, felt that resolution was used in ways that were not in its interest. So then it said, we're not going to vote for anything like that with respect to Syria.
Not just its interests, but also it saw not in the interests of the Syrian people.
Well, no, in the interests of how Russia viewed the interests of the Syrian people.
But it's just the same as how the Americans.
How the
Americans view the interests of the Syrian people.
No, Russia's not the Syrian people, and neither are the Americans.
Exactly, neither is the Arab League.
You have to go talk to the people who represent the Syrian people.
Exactly, exactly. Thank you.